In the dimly lit corridors of the colossal starship Ecliptica, a vessel that dwarfed entire moons, an air of superiority hung thick like the metallic scent of its polished walls. Princess Vailithra of the Zytherian Empire moved with deliberate grace, her every step echoing against the cold, reflective surfaces as though announcing her presence to the universe itself. Her emerald-hued skin shimmered faintly under the soft glow of bioluminescent panels, and her elongated ears twitched at even the faintest sound, a sign of both her heightened senses and her unshakable confidence. Vailithra was not just any princess. She was heir to one of the most technologically advanced civilizations in existence. The Zytherians had mastered interstellar travel centuries before humanity had even left their home planet's orbit. Their empire stretched across galaxies, their cities floating amidst nebulae and asteroid belts, their culture steeped in traditions older than the stars themselves. To be born into royalty within such a civilization meant being groomed from birth for greatness, taught that they were destined to rule over lesser beings. And Vailithra embodied this belief entirely. Her piercing golden eyes scanned the corridor ahead, narrowing slightly as they landed on a figure kneeling by the wall, a human male clad in simple gray robes, his head bowed low in deference. He was Kalin, a servant assigned to attend to her quarters. His role was menial, almost invisible, yet he existed solely to cater to her whims. She regarded him with mild disdain, her lip curling ever so slightly. Humans were weak creatures, fragile and fleeting compared to the longevity and resilience of her kind. They relied on emotion rather than logic, allowing fear and desire to cloud their judgment. In her mind, they were little more than insects masquerading as sentient beings. Kalin raised his gaze briefly, meeting hers for only a fraction of a second before quickly averting it again. There was something unsettling about those dark, fathomless eyes, something that made her pause momentarily. But she dismissed it as quickly as it came. What could a mere human possibly possess that would warrant her attention? He was nothing but a tool, a cog in the vast machinery of her life, easily replaced should he falter. "Rise," she commanded sharply, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Attend to my chambers. Ensure everything is prepared for my arrival." Kalin complied without hesitation, rising fluidly to his feet and bowing once more before turning toward her suite. As he walked away, Vailithra couldn't help but notice how quiet his movements were, how controlled. It was almost unnatural. Still, she shook off the thought. No matter how composed he appeared, he was still human, still inferior. She turned on her heel and continued down the corridor, her thoughts already drifting to matters far more important than the trivialities of a servant's behavior. Inside her opulent chamber, Kalin worked methodically, his hands moving with practiced precision as he adjusted the temperature settings, fluffed the silken cushions, and arranged the crystalline ornaments atop the floating shelves. Each task required focus, yet his mind wandered often, drawn back to memories of Earth, the blue skies, the rustling leaves, the laughter of children playing in sunlit fields. Those images felt distant now, like fragments of a dream slipping further away with each passing day. Yet they remained etched deeply into his soul, reminders of who he once was and what he had lost. Captured during a Zytherian raid on his homeworld, Kalin had been chosen not for his strength or skill but because of his adaptability. The aliens valued humans for their ability to endure hardship without breaking, at least, not immediately. 4 years, he had served aboard the Ecliptica, learning their language, their customs, their technology. At first, survival had been his sole motivation, but over time, something else took root: purpose. Kalin began to see opportunities where others saw oppression. He studied the ship systems when no one was watching, piecing together knowledge like a puzzle. He listened intently to conversations between officers, deciphering codes and protocols hidden beneath layers of arrogance and complacency. But none of this showed on the surface. To everyone around him, especially Princess Vailithra, he was just another faceless servant, obedient and inconsequential. Even when she entered the room moments later, sweeping past him with barely a glance, he maintained his posture of subservience, keeping his expression neutral. Inside, however, his heart raced. Today was different. Today, he sensed an opening, a chance to prove himself, though he wasn't sure why or how yet. As Vailithra settled onto her throne-like chair, dismissing him with a flick of her wrist, Kalin retreated to the corner of the room, blending into the shadows as he always did. From there, he observed her closely, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed impatiently against the armrest. Something troubled her, though she tried to mask it behind her usual haughty demeanor. Perhaps it was political unrest among the nobility, or maybe dissatisfaction with the Empire's recent military campaigns. Whatever it was, it gave Kalin hope. Weaknesses, no matter how small, could be exploited. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the occasional beep of a console. When Velithra finally rose to leave, Kalin followed discreetly, ensuring she didn't notice his presence. He knew better than to linger too long near her private quarters after completing his duties. It invited suspicion. Instead, he returned to the lower decks, navigating narrow passageways until he reached a secluded maintenance bay. Here, amidst tangled wires and discarded parts, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The truth was, Kalin wasn't merely surviving, he was planning. Every interaction, every observation, every scrap of information he gathered brought him closer to a goal he dared not speak aloud. Revenge, freedom, redemption. Maybe all three. What mattered most was that he refused to accept the fate handed to him. Unlike the other humans aboard the ship, who had resigned themselves to servitude, Kalin clung to the belief that he could change things, not just for himself, but for everyone trapped in the same cycle of subjugation. And then there was Velithra. Despite her cruelty, despite her dismissive attitude, he found himself intrigued by her. She was intelligent, ambitious, and undeniably powerful, but also flawed. Arrogance blinded her, making her vulnerable in ways she couldn't comprehend. If he played his cards right, if he waited for the perfect moment, he might just turn that vulnerability into an advantage. For now, though, he kept his intentions buried deep, biding his time while continuing to play the part of the obedient servant. Little did he know, fate was about to intervene in ways neither he nor Velithra could have anticipated. The alarm blared throughout the Ecliptica, a shrill, relentless wail that shattered the usual calm of the starship. Red warning lights bathed the corridors in an ominous glow, casting long, distorted shadows that danced eerily along the walls. Panic rippled through the crew as klaxons screamed their dire message. Critical system failure detected. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. The mechanical voice repeated the announcement over and over, each iteration sending fresh waves of urgency coursing through the veins of everyone aboard. Princess Velithra stood frozen in the center of her quarters, her golden eyes wide with shock. Never in her life had she encountered such chaos aboard the Ecliptica. This ship was supposed to be invincible, a pinnacle of Zytherian engineering. Yet here they were, facing what sounded like imminent disaster. Her initial disbelief quickly gave way to anger. How dare anything disrupt the perfection of her domain? "Servant!" she barked, her voice sharp and commanding. "What is happening?" Kalin, who had been standing silently in the corner, stepped forward with practiced calm. Though his exterior betrayed no sign of concern, his mind raced. He had heard rumors of instability in the ship's core systems, whispers among the engineers about shortcuts taken during construction. Could this be the culmination of those warnings? Regardless, now was not the time for speculation. "It appears to be a malfunction in the primary power grid, Your Highness," he replied evenly, his tone respectful yet devoid of panic. "I suggest we evacuate to a secure location until the issue is resolved." Velithra scoffed, crossing her arms defiantly. "Evacuate? Ridiculous. I will not flee like some coward. Send someone to fix it at once." Kalin hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the door. The situation was far more precarious than she realized. If the core failed completely, the resulting explosion would obliterate the ship and everyone on it. Time was of the essence, and waiting for orders from higher-ranking officials would only waste precious seconds. "Your Highness," he said carefully, choosing his words with precision, "the engineers are likely overwhelmed. If we act swiftly, we may prevent further damage. Allow me to assist." For a moment, Velithra stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, with a derisive snort, she waved him off. "Do as you wish, human. But do not fail me." Without another word, Kalin bowed and hurried out of the chamber, his steps quick but measured. As soon as he rounded the corner, his demeanor shifted. Gone was the submissive servant. In his place stood a man driven by purpose. He navigated the labyrinthine passages with ease, avoiding clusters of panicked crew members and dodging falling debris as the ship shuddered violently. The air grew warmer, tinged with the acrid smell of burning circuits, signaling that the problem was escalating faster than anticipated. Reaching the engineering bay, Kalin found chaos reigning supreme. Engineers scrambled frantically, shouting orders that went unheard amidst the cacophony of alarms and groaning metal. Sparks flew from ruptured conduits, and smoke billowed from damaged panels. Amidst the pandemonium, Kalin spotted Chief Engineer Lyran, a towering Zytherian whose normally stoic face was twisted with desperation. "Lyran!" Kalin called out, weaving through the crowd to reach him. "What's the status?" The engineer turned, startled to see a human addressing him directly. Recognition dawned, and he gestured wildly toward a massive holographic display hovering above the central console. "Core containment field is destabilizing. We can't stabilize it remotely. The manual override needs to be engaged manually." Kalin's jaw tightened. Engaging the manual override meant entering the reactor chamber itself, a task fraught with peril. Radiation levels inside would spike dangerously high, and even with protective gear, survival was uncertain. But hesitation was a luxury they couldn't afford. "I'll do it," Kalin said firmly, already strapping on a radiation suit from a nearby locker. Lyran grabbed his arm, his grip surprisingly gentle despite his size. "You don't have to." "There's no time to argue," Kalin interrupted, pulling away. "Just guide me through it." With a reluctant nod, Lyran began issuing rapid instructions, pointing out key components and relaying critical timing sequences. Kalin absorbed the information with laser-like focus, committing every detail to memory. When he was ready, he nodded once and stepped toward the sealed hatch leading into the reactor chamber. The interior was a nightmare of flashing lights, hissing steam, and searing heat. Every breath felt like inhaling fire, and the weight of the radiation pressed heavily against his chest. Ignoring the discomfort, Kalin moved with determined efficiency, following Lyran's directions to locate the manual override panel buried deep within the machinery. His hands worked deftly, bypassing fried circuits and rerouting power flows with a finesse that belied his supposed insignificance. Outside the chamber, Velithra paced anxiously in her quarters, torn between frustration and unease. How dare this human presume to take charge in a crisis? Yet part of her, a small, nagging part, couldn't ignore the possibility that he might succeed where others had failed. She clenched her fists, hating the uncertainty gnawing at her composure. Back in the reactor chamber, Kalin reached the final step. With a deep breath, he activated the override sequence, bracing himself for the surge of energy that would follow. The ship lurched violently, throwing him off balance, but he held firm, his fingers steady on the controls. Slowly, agonizingly, the readings stabilized. The containment field reasserted itself, sealing the breach and averting catastrophe. Exhausted and drenched in sweat, Kalin staggered back toward the exit, his vision swimming from the effects of prolonged exposure. As the hatch opened, he collapsed into the waiting arms of the engineers, who cheered triumphantly. Among them, Lyran looked at Kalin with newfound respect, murmuring words of gratitude. Word of Kalin's actions spread quickly, reaching Velithra before he could return to her quarters. When he finally arrived, still clad in the scorched remnants of his radiation suit, she regarded him with an unreadable expression. For the first time, there was no trace of disdain in her gaze, only a flicker of something deeper, more complex. "You saved us," she said quietly, her voice lacking its usual edge. Kalin inclined his head, too weary to respond. But as he met her eyes, he saw something unexpected: doubt. The arrogant princess who had always dismissed him as weak now seemed shaken, as if the foundation of her beliefs had cracked ever so slightly. And in that crack lay the seed of change. For both of them. In the days that followed, an unspoken tension simmered between Princess Velithra and Kalin. The incident in the reactor chamber had altered the dynamic irrevocably, though neither openly acknowledged it. Velithra carried herself with the same regal poise as always, yet there was a subtle shift in her interactions with him. Her commands, once delivered with biting condescension, now bore a hint of restraint, as if she were recalibrating her perception of him. Meanwhile, Kalin remained outwardly unchanged, performing his duties with meticulous precision, but inwardly, he felt the weight of what he had done, and what it might mean for his plans. It wasn't long before curiosity got the better of Velathra. One evening, as the ship drifted silently through a nebula painted in hues of violet and gold, she summoned Kalin to her private study, a rare invitation that sent ripples of speculation through the ranks of her attendants. The room was smaller than her main chamber, lined with shelves of ancient scrolls and glowing data crystals, relics of Zytherian history and conquest. She sat at a sleek desk, her fingers idly tracing the edge of a holopad as he entered and bowed deeply. "Explain yourself," she demanded without preamble, her golden eyes locking onto his face with unnerving intensity. "How did you know what to do? Why did you risk your life when others hesitated?" Kalin straightened slowly, choosing his words with care. "I've spent years observing the systems of this ship, Your Highness. Over time, patterns emerge. Even in chaos, there is order. As for risking my life..." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Sometimes, survival requires action, not hesitation." Velathra frowned, leaning back in her chair. "Survival? You speak as though you value yours above all else. Yet humans are so fragile, so fleeting. What difference does one life make in the grand scheme of things?" Her words stung, but Kalin kept his expression neutral. Perhaps fragility makes each moment more precious. Or perhaps it simply sharpens the instinct to fight for what remains. She studied him for a long moment, her brow furrowed as though trying to decipher a riddle. Finally she sighed, a sound laced with frustration and something akin to admiration. "You intrigue me, human, more than I care to admit. Tell me, what drives you? Loyalty to your kind? A desire for freedom?" Kalin tilted his head slightly, considering her question. "Both, perhaps, but also something greater. To endure is to resist. To resist is to hope. And hope, Your Highness, is a force even empires cannot crush." Her lips parted as though to retort, but instead she fell silent, her gaze drifting to the viewport behind her. Outside, the nebula swirled lazily, its colors shifting like liquid dreams. For a moment, they shared the quiet, two beings bound by circumstance yet separated by worlds of experience and expectation. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost contemplative. "You say hope cannot be crushed. Yet look at your people, scattered, enslaved, powerless. Where is their hope now?" Kalin's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Hope isn't extinguished by chains, Your Highness. It burns brightest in darkness. Perhaps one day, you'll understand that." Her eyes snapped back to his, sharp and probing. "And what makes you think I'd ever care to understand such weakness?" "Because understanding doesn't weaken us," he countered. "It strengthens us. Even the strongest steel can shatter if it refuses to bend." Velathra stared at him, her expression a mixture of irritation and fascination. She wanted to dismiss his words as naive ramblings, yet they lingered in her mind, refusing to fade. There was wisdom in his defiance, a depth she hadn't expected to find in someone she had written off as insignificant. Rising abruptly, she turned away, signaling the end of their conversation. "Leave me," she said curtly, though her tone lacked its usual bite. "We'll speak again another time." Kalin bowed once more and withdrew, leaving her alone with her thoughts. As the door slid shut behind him, Velathra sank into her chair, her fingers gripping the edges of the desk. Doubts she had long suppressed began to surface, whispering questions she didn't want to answer. Was her view of humans incomplete? Had her arrogance blinded her to truths that could reshape her understanding of power and purpose? And most unsettling of all, why did this particular human seem determined to challenge everything she believed? Meanwhile, Kalin returned to the lower decks, his mind racing. The exchange had confirmed what he suspected. Velathra's confidence was cracking, however slightly. That crack was an opportunity, a chink in the armor of an empire built on superiority and control. But exploiting it would require patience. And trust. Trust that she might listen, that she might see beyond her prejudices. It was a gamble, but one he was willing to take. As the Ecliptica continued its journey through the stars, the bond between princess and servant grew stronger, forged in moments of vulnerability and mutual defiance. Neither fully understood the implications of this connection, but both felt its pull, drawing them inexorably toward a future neither could predict. The revelation struck Vailithra like a meteor tearing through the atmosphere, an undeniable truth that shattered her carefully constructed worldview. Humans were not the weak, disposable creatures she had always believed them to be. They possessed a resilience, a quiet strength that defied her logic and challenged her assumptions. This realization did not come easily. It clawed its way into her consciousness, forcing her to confront the flaws in her own ideology. For the first time in her life, she questioned the very foundation of her existence, the belief that Zytherians were inherently superior, destined to dominate all other species. The emotional turmoil within her was palpable. Nights became sleepless stretches of introspection, her mind replaying Kalin's words and actions, dissecting them for hidden meanings. She found herself revisiting memories of her upbringing, recalling the lessons drilled into her by tutors and mentors who preached the infallibility of Zytherian supremacy. Yet now, those teachings felt hollow, their authority undermined by the undeniable evidence of Kalin's courage and ingenuity. Doubt gnawed at her, a relentless tide eroding the fortress of certainty she had built around herself. Her growing respect for Kalin complicated matters further. Where once she had seen only a servant, she now recognized a man of remarkable intelligence and conviction. His willingness to risk everything, not just for survival, but for hope, stirred something deep within her, a yearning she couldn't quite name. It wasn't merely admiration, it was a profound acknowledgement of his humanity, a quality she had dismissed as weakness but now saw as a source of immense power. This newfound respect unsettled her, challenging the rigid hierarchy she had always upheld. Yet alongside this internal conflict came a dawning awareness of the broader implications. If humans were capable of such feats, what did that mean for the countless others enslaved or oppressed under Zytherian rule? Could their suffering be justified if they, too, harbored untapped potential? These questions haunted her, planting seeds of guilt and responsibility she had never considered before. The weight of her people's dominance suddenly felt heavier, burdened by the knowledge that it might be built on lies. Her relationship with Kalin evolved in tandem with these revelations. Their interactions grew more frequent, less formal. Conversations that began as interrogations transformed into exchanges of ideas, debates that pushed both of them to think beyond their preconceived notions. Vailithra found herself seeking his perspective, valuing his insights in ways she would have deemed impossible weeks earlier. Kalin, for his part, remained cautious but open, sensing the shift in her demeanor and responding with measured honesty. He shared stories of Earth, painting vivid pictures of its beauty and complexity, offering glimpses of a world she had never truly understood. These moments of connection deepened their bond, creating a fragile yet undeniable alliance. Vailithra began to see Kalin not as a servant, but as an equal, a partner in navigating the moral quandaries that now consumed her. Together, they explored the ethical dilemmas posed by the Empire's policies, questioning the righteousness of conquest and the cost of subjugation. Each discussion left her more conflicted, yet also more determined to seek answers. But this transformation did not go unnoticed. Whispers of change rippled through the corridors of the Ecliptica, carried by observant crew members who noticed the subtle shifts in their princess's behavior. Some viewed her growing empathy with suspicion, fearing it signaled weakness. Others admired her willingness to question tradition, seeing it as a sign of strength. Among the highest echelons of the Zytherian elite, however, concern mounted. Rumors reached the Imperial Council, sparking debates about whether Vailithra's evolving perspective threatened the stability of the Empire. One evening, as the ship traversed a starless void, Vailithra received a summons from the Council. The holographic projection of her father, Emperor Zinthorus, filled her chamber, his stern visage radiating authority. His golden eyes, so similar to hers, bore into her with disapproval. "Daughter," he began, his voice heavy with reproach, "reports have reached me of your unconventional behavior. Is it true you consort with a human servant as though he were your peer?" Vailithra stiffened, her pride bristling at the accusation. "Father, I do not consort. I observe. I learn. There is value in understanding those we govern." Zinthorus's expression darkened. "Understanding leads to weakness. Our empire thrives because we maintain order, not because we coddle lesser beings." Do not let sentiment cloud your judgment. His words ignited a spark of defiance within her. Sentiment, she shot back, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. Or justice? Father, if our rule is based on falsehoods, then what are we fighting for? The Emperor's glare intensified, and for a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. When he finally spoke, his tone was icy. Consider your loyalties carefully, Velethra. The Empire depends on them. As the transmission ended, Velethra sank into her chair, her heart pounding. The pressure to conform weighed heavily upon her, threatening to crush the fragile progress she had made. Yet even as doubt crept in, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She could no longer turn away from the truth. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was resolved to face them, not as the arrogant princess she had once been, but as someone striving to become more. Beside her, unseen but ever-present, Kalin watched and waited, knowing the storm was only beginning. The winds of rebellion began to stir aboard the Ecliptica, subtle at first but growing stronger with each passing day. Kalin, ever vigilant, noticed the signs early. The whispered conversations in shadowed corners, the exchanged glances among the human servants, the quiet acts of defiance that hinted at a collective awakening. These small rebellions were fueled by a newfound sense of hope, sparked by his actions in the reactor chamber and nurtured by the shifting dynamics between him and Velethra. The humans, long resigned to their fate, now dared to imagine a different future, one where they were no longer pawns in an alien empire's game. Kalin moved cautiously, aware that any misstep could unravel everything. He used his position as Velethra's trusted attendant to gather intelligence, listening intently to the murmurs of discontent among the crew and piecing together fragments of dissent. He learned of secret meetings held in abandoned cargo holds, of coded messages passed through maintenance channels, of leaders emerging from the ranks of the oppressed. Each discovery filled him with a mix of exhilaration and dread. The movement was gaining momentum, but so too was the risk of exposure. Among those who joined the cause was Mira, a young woman who had served as a medic in the ship's infirmary. Her hands, skilled in healing, now crafted makeshift tools and devices to aid the resistance. She approached Kalin one evening, her dark eyes alight with determination. "We need you," she said simply, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear beneath it. "You've shown us that change is possible. Now we must act." Kalin nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then we prepare. But remember, this isn't just about escape. It's about dismantling the system that keeps us chained." Their plans were intricate, requiring precision and patience. They identified key vulnerabilities in the ship's security protocols, exploiting weaknesses Kalin had uncovered during his years of observation. They recruited allies among the lower-ranking Zytherian crew members, individuals disillusioned by the Empire's excesses and willing to risk betrayal for the promise of reform. Slowly, painstakingly, they built a network of trust and cooperation, united by a shared vision of freedom. Yet the stakes grew higher with each success. The Imperial Council, alerted to the growing unrest, tightened its grip on the ship. Surveillance increased, curfews were enforced, and punishments for disobedience became harsher. Fear permeated the air, a suffocating presence that tested the resolve of even the bravest rebels. Kalin felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him, the responsibility for countless lives resting squarely on his shoulders. He pushed forward nonetheless, driven by the knowledge that retreat was no longer an option. Amidst this brewing storm, Velethra found herself caught in a maelstrom of conflicting loyalties. Her father's warning echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of the expectations placed upon her. Yet her growing empathy for the humans, and her deepening bond with Kalin, pulled her in the opposite direction. She wrestled with the implications of siding with the rebellion, knowing it would brand her a traitor to her people. The thought of betraying her lineage filled her with anguish, yet the alternative, perpetuating the injustices she now despised, was equally unbearable. One night, unable to bear the isolation of her inner turmoil, she sought out Kalin. She found him in a dimly lit storage bay, poring over schematics of the ship's ventilation system. He looked up as she entered, surprise flickering across his face before giving way to guarded neutrality. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone polite but wary. "To understand," she replied, stepping closer. "Tell me what you're planning." Kalin hesitated, weighing the risks of revealing too much. But something in her gaze, raw vulnerability mixed with fierce determination, convinced him to trust her. "We're preparing to strike," he admitted. "To disable the ship's command center and broadcast a message to the Empire. A declaration of independence." Velithra's breath caught in her throat. "And then what? You think the Empire will simply let you go?" "No," he said grimly. "But sometimes, freedom requires sacrifice." She stared at him, her mind racing. The enormity of what he proposed was staggering, the potential consequences catastrophic. Yet she couldn't deny the righteousness of their cause, or the courage it took to pursue it. "If I help you," she said slowly, "I'll be branded a traitor. My family, my people." "You'll also be taking a stand," Kalin interrupted gently. "For something greater than loyalty to a flawed system. Isn't that worth the risk?" Tears welled in her eyes, unshed but undeniable. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," he said firmly, his voice imbued with quiet conviction. "Stronger than you realize." In that moment, Velithra made her choice. She reached out, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Tell me what I need to do." As the hours ticked away, the final pieces of the rebellion's plan fell into place. The humans worked tirelessly, their movements synchronized like gears in a clockwork machine. Supplies were stockpiled, weapons improvised, and escape routes mapped with meticulous precision. Meanwhile, Velithra leveraged her position to sabotage key elements of the ship's defenses, disabling surveillance drones and rerouting power to obscure critical systems. Her actions were calculated risks, each one bringing her closer to the precipice of treason. The night of the uprising arrived, cloaked in the deceptive calm of space. The rebels gathered in the designated staging area, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of stolen datapads. Kalin stood at the forefront, his presence a steadying force amid the nervous energy. Beside him, Velithra stood tall, her golden eyes blazing with resolve. For the first time, she felt truly alive, her purpose clear and unyielding. "We've come too far to turn back now," Kalin declared, his voice carrying through the assembled crowd. "Tonight, we reclaim our freedom. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who has suffered under the Empire's tyranny." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, followed by a chorus of affirmations. Velithra stepped forward, raising her hand to silence them. "This isn't just about rebellion," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "It's about proving that strength isn't defined by domination. It's about showing the Empire, and ourselves, that we are worthy of respect." The rebels erupted into cheers, their spirits buoyed by her words. As they dispersed to their assigned positions, Kalin turned to Velithra, his expression a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "Whatever happens next," he said softly, "know that I trust you." "And I you," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. Together, they moved toward the heart of the ship, where destiny awaited. The battle for freedom, and for redemption, was about to begin.